Hi, this is my review of KULT, Divinity Lost. This is the 4th edition, the core rules of a game that started in 1991 and has gone through a reboot. It has been adapted to the present times. There are so many good things that I have to tell you about this role-playing game. This is a game of contemporary horror, but it's also a game of philosophical horror, of spiritual horror. You know those warnings that sometimes they put on games that it says, be careful, this game has mature themes, or don't try to do anything fictional in real life, and things like that, or don't take this game as just fiction, it's not real. This is a really mature game. This is a game for people that are not just adults, that is, it's for people who are mature both emotionally, mentally, enough to withstand the horrors that you will experience when you are living the lives of these characters in this fictional world. This game is going to test you. It's going to put you through fictional scenarios where you explore the darker aspects of humanity and even of forces beyond humanity. This is a game of things that were lost, of virtue that was almost forgotten, and where powers from beyond comprehension weave a web of lies, of illusions and deceit to keep humanity in a slumber, so they did not remember that once they were divine, or at least divine in their particular awareness or perception of things. There is a lot of bleakness to this game, and just tiny hints or glimmers of hope. The system and the setting, the theme, they all intertwine in a sort of Gnostic knot that flows through a dark Kabbalistic scheme. Now, let's talk about the quality of the PDF. The quality is great. My only criticism: there are a few typos, but they are not many, and they will not present an obstacle to understand the content. But this book is a work of art. There are so many creepy, vile, and grotesque things when it comes to the theme, the artwork, but that doesn't mean that it's not expressed in a beautiful way. That is, it's a horror that manages to touch the soul. It resonates within you. I'm not exaggerating the illustrations here. They feel so vulnerable, sensual, and at the same time so threatening, so violent. I will include some of the images in the book, but with some of the images I will only show some parts of them, because you never know with YouTube censorship. There are some really raw, very explicit images detailing such horrible scenes that it's somewhat risky. I would like for this review to be enjoyed by many people without some sort of censorship. So I will show you as much as I can of the images, but you will see images of crimes, of angels and demons, but angels in their more alien, more unapproachable way. As I was telling you, this is a very bleak setting, and the demons and other entities and creatures, both feral and civilized, they all look quite beautiful, but at the same time so dangerous, so violent, so bleak, so pessimistic in a way, with a bit of sadness, but at the same time hiding mysteries and all sorts of vile secrets within them. The document is fully bookmarked, so it's going to be very easy for you to navigate the entire PDF. And at the end of the PDF, you have a fully hyperlinked index. Added to this, the hyperlinked table of contents. It's just a pleasure to go through the entire PDF that is exquisitely decorated, not only with the images, but with this graphic design, the reticule, the arrangement. It has this sense of displacement. It expresses urban decadence, while at the same time It perspires angelical and diabolical knowledge. I struggle as I try to express the graphic design of each page, as you see some golden decorations that somehow get dissolved or corroded into the darkness. This is a game of both light and dark, but seen through shadowy or smoky lenses. The book is quite poetic. I'm usually not a fan of entire illustrations taking too many pages, but as they introduce you to some of the secrets of the game and they give a presentation for the overall design, there is some sort of shifting or perhaps a juxtaposition of sorts where you have illustration, a bit of poetry, illustration again, more poetry, and then they get right down to business. And I think this works wonderfully with the theme of the game, with the meta plot, with the story, how it mixes mysticism, occult philosophy, while at the same time the most tangible and pragmatic aspects of our everyday modern society. If you are thinking of getting this book as a physical book, I encourage you to do so. I think you will be glad to have this on your bookshelf. And now let's talk about the contents of KULT Divinity Lost. When it comes to the way the contents are presented, if I had a small criticism, but I think it's more like a personal preference of mine, it's that I would have preferred it if they presented everything about the setting first and then how to create your characters. Maybe they did this to entice or draw the player in, presenting the information related to character creation and the system, and later on revealing the truth of KULT. But I would have preferred it the other way because you would have the information then to create a character from the beginning. But maybe it's just a personal preference of mine. As I was telling you, maybe you wanted to know about how to create a character and how the game plays, and then you want to know about the story. But nonetheless, I want to make notice of that. The world of KULT is a world of the blackest night, of the most unfathomable, impenetrable darkness. This is a very personal type of horror. This is not exactly on the scale of Lovecraftian horror, even though in many of Lovecraft's stories you do have some personal moments, some very personal moments concerning genetics, family lines and such. But when in Lovecraft you feel like the threats could easily trample over humanity, over the entire planet, and feel nothing at all, no remorse, feeling as if humanity and the world was insignificant. Here in KULT, it's more on the Clive Barker side of things. The entities in KULT are very interested in keeping humanity asleep and enslaved and blind to their own lost divinity. Truly, the horror in KULT Divinity Lost is a more personal type of horror that tries to get under your skin. It's more Clive Barkerian rather than Lovecraftian. Reminds me a lot of the Cenobites, of their strange dimension, and those creatures that have exposed tissue, muscles, organs, bones, and they seem to be fine, moving about. Some of them could be dripping blood. It seems like part of their essence or nature to express pain and damnation. The setting of KULT is a place where almost everything and everyone and everywhere could be a gateway or a passageway or a portal. It could be the screen of your cell phone or your tablet. It could be that dark alleyway over there. It could be your very same room. It could be under the shelves. Maybe a very cheap bar is the direct entrance to other worlds. Or maybe a very elegant restaurant could be the hideout or the gathering spot of beings from other worlds, The basic premise of KULT, and I will elaborate more on this later on in this review, is that humanity was once at a sort of peak of divinity. They were gods, they were deities, but then they were toppled down. This does not mean that humanity was composed of good guys. Many of their acts were questionable. Nonetheless, this being known as the Demiurge took down humanity, shackled them to this material illusion, and established his own kingdom. So humanity lies in a state of amnesia, sort of like a drug type of entrancement in which they cannot remember their divinity. And so the archons and the angels, they rule over mankind and do everything in their power to keep a structure so that humans do not remember that they were once divine. Something happened to the structure of power of the Demiurge. He went missing, and a rebellion was successful by part of one of his archons. This gave rise to other beings in a sort of mirror or twisted version of the archon's domain, and it is in this place where the Death Angels rule. The Death Angels want to overthrow the archons, not because they sympathize with humanity, but because they want power for themselves. So mankind is trapped in this middle ground of illusions between the archons and the Death Angels, and other types of powers and entities as well. KULT is a very personal game. I cannot stress this enough. You can play with up to 6 players, one of them being the game master, and you will tell the stories of humans who are trying to understand the truth about it all, about reality, about their lives, about the world. How they are caged through superficial and shallow means, kept in all sorts of vices, all sorts of pleasures and degeneracy, so that they cannot understand the truth, what really is going on, who is pulling the strings. So in KULT, you play as these very vulnerable humans. Thankfully, throughout the entire book, in those places where it is needed, you have great examples on how to run a game. And because KULT uses a very fast, smooth system, all sorts of resolutions concerning tasks, interactions, combat can be handled quite quickly, can be resolved efficiently, so that one player character does not hog all of the spotlight. When it comes to the rules, this is a game that leans more towards storytelling. The player characters will have opportunities to display strategies, tactics, to investigate, to apply reasoning, but it's all about the story. So when it comes to the actions that the characters can take, these are known as moves. And the game master can also take moves, but most of what happens in the game is determined by the actions of the players. There is a situation presented, they decide to take some sort of action by rolling 2 10-sided dice and adding the relevant or the related characteristic or attribute. It depends on the type of check that they are making, and so they will get a result. Based on this result, it could be a successful roll, it could be somewhat successful but with a caveat or some conflict or challenge or negative thing arising, or it could be a complete failure. Usually, if you roll 15 or above, you obtain what you want. If it's between 10 and 14, you obtain what you want, but there could be some sort of condition, some sort of negative factor that could make things a bit more difficult or not as expected by the player character. And if you roll 9 or below, it's a complete failure, and depending on the situation, it could turn out pretty bad for your player character. There could be other modifiers and other situational effects that could have some influence on this particular roll. Now let's talk about archetypes. Archetypes in KULT Divinity Lost are just guidelines for you to create characters that make sense with the setting. In KULT, you can create any character that you want, but for ease of insertion in a particular scenario, these archetypes show you some ways in which you can add different traits, different backgrounds and dark secrets, so that that particular human that you create feels real within the fiction. These archetypes are divided in three categories. You have the sleeper. So what is the sleeper? The sleeper is a human that remains in a sort of trance or slumber, living a very shallow, meaningless and superficial life. He's usually trapped in a particular, it could be trend or some sort of fashion or some sort of vice. It could be anything. We will talk a bit more about that when I specifically refer to the sleeper. And then we have a broader category, which are the aware type of archetypes. Those characters that are aware know that something is wrong with the world, that things are not what they seem. Life is not as obvious. There is something or someone pulling the strings. There is something behind the curtain of what is obvious, and they want to find out what it is. The third category is the enlightened category of archetypes. Enlightened archetypes have already pierced the illusion, the veil. They know that this material world is not the only thing that exists. So they know that there are certain spiritual energies and principles, philosophical elements that can actually allow them to reshape or modify reality. So they have some abilities that could be considered magical or miraculous. So the player characters can belong to any of these categories. There is a category even beyond enlightened, but that category feels more like on a deity type of level, and it's not suitable to be used as a player character because there are some things that could be too easy for that particular entity, or perhaps even too difficult. As you create your character, you need to define certain things. The occupation, that is the profession or trade of your character, if that character has one, and dark secrets. Dark secrets are a very important part of KULT Divinity Lost. Every sort of horror, every sort of adventure, every sort of encounter or event that the character goes through is related to that character's particular dark secret. These dark secrets could be individual things, that is, each player character could have his or her own dark secret, or they could all share the same dark secret, or only some characters could share a dark past, some others could be unrelated. And this dark secret is usually related to something very bad. Maybe your character participated in a forbidden ceremony. Maybe your character was victim of some sort of crime, or maybe your character was a criminal. It could be anything. It's something that the character is not too proud of. And because this character has engaged in such an activity or been the focus of some unfortunate circumstance, that character has drawn to himself or herself the attention of the dark powers of KULT. Now the archons, the death angels, and many other creatures and entities are aware that your character knows something about this world, and it is in their best interest that you do not thwart their plans, that humanity remains asleep and as prisoners. Then you define disadvantages. You choose two disadvantages. It could be that your character is obsessed with something. You could have a phobia, or maybe you're a rationalist and you have difficulty accepting some things that do not make sense, at least in more conventional situations. You also have advantages. Maybe your character is really good at research. Maybe your character is very athletic or has some sort of authority, some sort of special resource. You also distribute your attributes. You have fortitude, reflex, and willpower. And you also have charisma, coolness, intuition, perception, reason, soul, and violence. Each of these attributes is related to a specific advantage, and they will act as modifiers when you make your checks. You also define the looks of your character, clothing, the face, the eyes, the body. You make up a name for your character, and you establish different relations with other player characters or even non-player characters. KULT Divinity Lost can be played with a very short group. If you only have 2 player characters or 1 player characters and a game master, it's possible to have this relations system. You just need to establish relations between the player character and non-player characters. Now let's talk about the archetypes, just a very brief description of each one. You have the academic, which studies the world from the desk. Everything is interconnected via logical rules of causality. Yet, the academic suspects something must be wrong. Then we have the agent. The agent does whatever is necessary to protect and serve her employer's best interests. People are simply resources to be used, abused, and expended. Then we have the artist. The artist exists only to create, to give themselves body and soul over to the arts. They express desires through many mediums, hypnotic paintings, music trapping the audience in pure ecstasy, books with spellbinding words. Then we have the Avenger. The Avenger has been robbed of something dear to them, be it their loved one, job, family, humanity, it could be anything. Regardless, there will be blood to pay. Then we have the broken. The broken has gazed into the abyss and escaped with their mind in tatters. They could be a homeless person who subconsciously performs rituals to forgotten gods, or the mental patient who became a test subject for experimental medications. Then we have the careerist. The careerist is the consummate brown-nosing backstabber. Most remain stuck in a cubicle farm, performing the same mundane tasks day after day, while the ruthless few climb upwards in the corporate hierarchy. Next we have the criminal. Mobsters, gang members, thieves, drug dealers, and hitmen are all driven by 2 things: their quest for money and everything they've endured during their lives. Then we have the cursed. The cursed is living on borrowed time. They might be unfortunate victims of a deadly disease or the targets of a higher power's rage. Usually, however, the cursed has sealed their own fate by selling their soul for fortune and fame. Then we have the deceiver. Deceivers are manipulative people who fool others into trusting them to deprive them of money or services. Then we have the descendant. Blood, soul, and heritage weigh heavy on the descendant's shoulders. She is an offspring of some mythic ancestor or some sort of lost god chosen by a dark cult, or maybe they belong to some sort of cursed family line or bloodline. Then we have the detective. They could be private eyes, taking care of usual cases, but then they could become too obsessed or focused on finding answers that should have been left buried. Then we have the doll. In the shadows, the doll stands ready. The doll wants to break free and to be human again. But the doll has been turned into an object by others. Then we have the drifter. The drifter never stays in one place long enough to feel at home. They are always on the go, always on the road. Maybe there is some mysterious power pushing them onwards. Nonetheless, the drifter keeps moving on and finding many things on the road. Then we have the fixer. The fixer has all the contacts and uses them to make quick cash. As long as there's money involved, the fixer doesn't care about the stakes. Then we have the occultist. The occultist seeks the answers to life's mysteries through occult theories. They quest through ancient tomes or even obscure internet forums. They look for dark dimensions. Then we have the prophet. Faith and religion bestow power, whether you are a priest, pastor, anything. The prophet may have chosen to serve their God, but it could also be a path that they've been forced to walk by their family or congregation. Then we have the Ronin. The Ronin is always at the edge. They can take care of many things, many odd jobs, many dangerous jobs, without asking too many questions. Next we have the scientist. An explorer of the unknown in the hope of finding answers to questions of life and the universe. There is also the seeker, which is an explorer of modern, ancient and forgotten urban myths. They are bloggers, hackers and storytellers of the modern age. Then we have the veteran. The veteran has seen death up close, spending most of life in combat, tortured by memories of past conflicts. Now let's talk a bit more about the sleeper. This is separate from the aware archetypes that I just talked about. The sleeper is someone who is only worried about eating and getting up for work, going to work, going back from work, finding some sort of shallow entertainment, going to sleep, and rinse and repeat. The cycle goes on and on and on. The sleeper is usually distracted by perhaps discussion forums, fashion, online gaming, TV series, checking your cell phone, social media, everything that keeps the mind away from more philosophical, important or pressing questions. The sleeper indulges in that. It enjoys being in that particular fixation or vice so much that if the seeker does not engage in his particular activity of choice, maybe he needs to check out Instagram or Facebook constantly. If you do not do that, if you do not indulge in that certain repetitive activity, you will start to lose stability. You will have to make a keep it together, check or move, or you will give in to your particular vice, your particular distraction. So it could be quite dangerous. Maybe, what if you're in the middle of a firefight or gunfight, or maybe you're escaping from someone and you feel this compulsion, this great obsessive need. Perhaps you need to check out a particular website, or you need a smoke, or you need to drink, and you're in the middle of some other activity. If you fail in the keep it together move, you will have to do that activity, even if it costs you your life. So the sleeper is the weakest of the archetypes. It is recommended that all player characters start out at the same category of archetypes. That is, it's better if everyone plays as an aware type of character or a sleeper type of character, because sleepers are at a disadvantage when compared to other archetypes. Although a skilled role-playing group can handle a situation where there are some sleepers or one sleeper within the group, as long as they accept that handicap, it's possible. But it's also a good idea to start out as sleepers and then they become aware to what's really going on in the world of KULT Divinity Lost. And there are a lot of good role-playing opportunities when you play as a sleeper, because some of them either have not yet committed something that qualifies as a dark secret. Maybe it is during the course of their first scenarios when they participate in a questionable type of activity, or maybe they actually did something really bad in the past or were the victims of something and they just blocked it. They tried to forget about it, and as they realize the truth about the world, they start to remember those traumatic moments, and now they have developed their own dark secret as they move from sleeper to an aware archetype. Because once the sleeper becomes aware, the archetype changes completely to the point of obtaining a new archetype. And if your character concept simply does not fit any of the archetypes presented in this section, you can create your own archetype. And I will talk about the enlightened archetypes later on in this review. After character creation, we have an entire chapter detailing character traits. These are things such as advantages, disadvantages, dark secrets. First, we have a list of disadvantages. Disadvantages are the character's personal failings, negative personality traits, adverse conditions. They are things that make your life more difficult. You usually want to keep your character outside of situations in which one of these disadvantages are triggered. These disadvantages are also considered moves. Remember, every action in the game is considered a move. This is not just about walking or running to a particular area. Anything that you want to attempt, it's considered a move. So you have things such as bad reputation. You are hated by the public for something you are accused of. Or maybe you are cursed. You are afflicted by a curse. Or maybe you are hunted. There are supernatural forces after you. Maybe you have a nemesis, a phobia. All of this will come into play as the player characters go through different encounters and scenarios. Then we have a list of advantages. Advantages are your strengths, rare abilities, supernatural powers, anything that works in your favor. Most advantages are tied to a particular attribute, and when a character decides to take an action, or rather make a move, these advantages come into play. So you have things such as academic network tied to charisma. You have contacts at universities around the world. Or maybe you are an animal speaker. This is tied to intuition. You can control animals. Maybe you have authority. This is also tied to charisma. You can use your authority to influence others. Maybe you have battlefield medicine knowledge. This is tied to reason. You are trained in stabilizing wounds. Maybe you are bound to something. This is tied to the soul. You can draw powers from an extra-dimensional entity. Maybe you have a deadly stare. This is tied to violence. You can freeze a non-player character with your stare. So you have many different advantages that will come into play whenever you want to attempt something. There are actually a lot more advantages than disadvantages in the game, and that's really good because this is a really bleak, gritty and dangerous world in KULT, Divinity Lost. Let's talk a bit more about dark secrets. Dark secrets are those events from the player character's past that haunt them, that threaten them. Every time they are trying to do something to solve some sort of problem, to understand the meaning or the truth behind some sort of conspiracy, the player characters are going to be haunted by their past. Most of the entities, the dimensions, the powers that will be antagonistic forces in the different scenarios are going to be tied to the dark secrets of the player characters. You have a few examples of dark secrets. Maybe your character is a chosen one. You have been chosen by a god to become its advocate or sacrificial lamb. So maybe you have some drives related to avoiding your pursuers, or fulfilling your god's desire, or expanding the cult's membership. Or maybe you have been appointed as some sort of guardian. So you have been chosen to protect an important object or place or person. So you need to keep what you are guarding safe. You perhaps need to pass the guardianship over to a worthy individual. Or maybe your character possesses forbidden knowledge. Maybe you have uncovered some horrid truth which brings reality's very nature into question. So your personal drives could be related to revealing this truth to the world, or acquiring more knowledge and power, or fighting a specific enemy. So these are just examples. The players can come up with their own dark secrets for their player characters. You have other things such as family secret, guilty of crime, occult experience, pact with dark forces, victim of a crime, etc. Disadvantages and advantages are acquired when you create your character, but you can also obtain them during the course of a scenario. Sometimes advantages and disadvantages will be replacing each one. So maybe you lose a disadvantage and you gain an advantage, or maybe you lose some sort of advantage and you gain a disadvantage. There are some guidelines here that tell you how to balance advantages with disadvantages, and at the same time that it makes sense with the fiction. That's a very important consideration of KULT Divinity Lost. The entire game is based around making sense of the fiction. That is, all of the rules, the mechanics need to express that story, and the characters' endeavors to understand the world, realize the truth, and deal with their dark secrets. And just to give you an example of how a particular disadvantage could play out during a scenario, maybe you have the disadvantage of being cursed. So you are cursed, and maybe you have this thing that every time you cross in front of a particular temple, something happens. So maybe your character is moving in front of a building and he's not aware that that building serves as a temple for a certain cult. So now you need to make a roll to see if your curse is activated. So you roll your 2 10-sided dice. You do not add modifiers in this case. And if you roll 15 or more, you temporarily avoid the curse's influence. But if you roll 9 or less, the Game Master takes 3 holds. And if you roll between 10 and 14, the Game Master takes 1 hold. Now, what is 1 hold? Basically, a hold is an excuse for the Game Master to make things more challenging, difficult, and terrifying, potentially horrible for your player character when the moment is right. It could be immediately, or it could be later on. So let's say that you did really poorly on your roll. The Game Master now has 3 holds. Those are basically 3 opportunities to screw up your character's attempts to solve something or to navigate some place. It could be anything related to encounters during the scenarios. So maybe because of the curse, the character pulls out his or her gun during an encounter and the gun jams. Or maybe the character is trying to look through certain documents, some books, but by doing so, he opens some sort of forbidden page and he is transported to another place. It could be anything. In KULT, there are portals where you least expect to find them. Now, when it comes to advantages, there are some advantages that are particularly useful in physical conflicts and action scenes. These are known as edges. They activate only once per action scene, and they will provide some positive things, perhaps modifiers in different combat situations. So for example, let's say that you have this Street Fighter advantage, and you make your roll at the beginning of a fight. Now you will have some bonuses when engaging in combat with your enemies. Let me give you an example of how an advantage, a normal advantage, could play out during an encounter. Let's use eye for detail as an example. Let's say you had the time to study someone, maybe you have been making conversation with a particular non-player character, and you make your roll. The eye for detail is tied to perception. Let's say that you did really well on your roll and you roll 15 or above. So now you get to ask 3 questions about that character. You could find out where that character is from, if that character is capable of violence, if there is some way to tempt or seduce that character. But let's say that you didn't roll so well and you only roll between 10 and 14. You can only ask 2 questions from a list of questions given here in the section of eye for detail. But if you did really poorly, let's say you rolled 9 or less, you only ask 1 question, but you expose your inquisitiveness to the character that you are observing. There are also some other advantages that are a bit more passive. You do not need to make rolls every time they come into play. Because for example, maybe your character is hardened, so you take a +1 ongoing to endure injury. And we will talk more about this in combat. Or maybe your character is jaded, so whenever you roll between 10 and 14 in a keep it together move, you may suppress your emotions and postpone their effects until the next scene. Following that, we have a chapter detailing how the player characters can interact with the world around them. Let me give you a few examples so that you can better understand how gameplay in KULT Divinity Lost proceeds. Let's say you have 2 player characters that have entered perhaps a hotel and they are at the lobby, and suddenly a member of some sort of group or organization that they have been investigating enters the lobby and he's about to draw his weapon to shoot the player characters. So now they need to decide what to do. Maybe they have some obstacles, perhaps some pillars or furniture between them and their enemy, and they attempt to run at the enemy, try to close the distance as fast as possible and take him down. That could be an option. Or maybe they want to run and hide behind a wall or turn around the corner and try to escape the lobby as soon as possible. You could handle it either way, and it will be resolved through a move roll. So they will make their roll. Perhaps, for example, if they want to run at the enemy, trying to avoid getting shot, or making it to the enemy before he actually draws the gun, maybe it's a short distance, they will have to make some roll perhaps related to Daredevil when it comes to advantage. If they have the Daredevil advantage, they could get a bonus when doing that. The players need to be creative, take into consideration their advantages and any element in the environment that they can use in their favor. So you make your roll, and perhaps you rolled a 15, you actually tackled your enemy, or maybe you were wielding some sort of improvised weapon, or maybe you wanted to attack with your bare hands. Either way, let's say that you rolled 15 or above, you were successful, and now you have eliminated that threat. Here in KULT Divinity Lost, combat can be solved quite quickly. It depends on how much emphasis the game master wants to put into a particular encounter. So this is a great system if you want to have like a split the group type of situations where you have two characters in very different locations and situations. Maybe one is in combat, maybe another one is investigating things. You could handle it quite easily and smoothly. It could be resolved in just a couple of rolls, perhaps. Or maybe you decided to run for it. Let's make it so as if the characters decided to run out of the lobby. So maybe they made their rolls and now they escaped. But even if you decided to run away or to tackle your enemy, maybe you rolled between a 10 and a 14. That's not exactly a very good roll. It's not terrible, but not optimal. Maybe you accomplished what you wanted to do. If you wanted to tackle your enemy or attack him with a weapon or such, maybe you did get him, maybe you actually killed your enemy, but he actually managed to fire a shot before that, and now the bullet grazed your leg, and for the rest of several encounters, until you get perhaps medical treatment, you're going to be limping around. And if you did terrible on your roll, maybe you rolled 9 or less, maybe he actually killed you, maybe he shot you in the head or in the chest. So that's the risk. You have to be mindful that this is a very gritty game and things will not go your way if you are acting constantly in a reckless sort of way. So let's imagine that the characters escape the lobby and now they have this enemy, perhaps it's an agent of an organization and he has called backup. So now you have several people after you, or maybe they sent out cars or they released some dogs, and you are moving through a labyrinth of dark alleyways. And just before you think you're going to end up in a dead end, you see this dark alleyway. It's a very narrow path and it goes right in front of a hole in the wall. It almost looks as if a worm just burrowed itself into a building, and you see this dark hole. And you need to go in front of this hole if you want to keep on escaping, because even though you have somewhat of an advantage, you have stretched the distance between you and your pursuers, you still hear them close by. So you need to make a choice quickly. What will you do? Maybe you decide to carelessly walk in front of the dark hole, and because of that, suddenly a multitude of arms and hands just reach out and take you and pull you inside. Perhaps they are tentacles or claws, it could be anything. So that would probably spell the end of your player character. It depends. Or maybe it gets you into a really dangerous situation in which you will have to do some quick thinking and it will not be easy to escape from that. But maybe you decide to just run or jump as quickly as possible in front of the hole. Maybe you would do a roll related to some sort of athletic maneuver. Or maybe you decide to grab like a trash can lid and use it to block and parry anything that could come out of the hole and attack you. There could be many ways to handle this. Maybe you want to throw something inside of the hole first. Maybe you're actually carrying perhaps a semi-automatic weapon and you start to move as you fire into the hole. So all of these things, it could require a check. It could be an automatic success or an automatic failure. It all depends on the actions that you are taking that, as I said earlier, are known as moves in this game. So the moves that you decide to take will determine the fate of your characters. And game masters also carry out moves, but their moves are automatic successes. So what does this mean? Does this mean that when an enemy attacks you, he's automatically going to hit you and damage you? Not necessarily, unless you are playing in a very foolish way. It means that when something attacks you, you're going to react. You're going to have the choice on how you're going to respond to that attack. Maybe you want to dodge or parry. Anything that you can think related to the situation, the environment, you can do that. So the game master takes more of a storyteller role, and the players make the roles based on their choices. So it's always about the game master presenting an encounter or a situation and the players reacting to it, or the game master reacting to what the players want to do. And I think that for this narrative style it works great. Let's talk a bit more about the attributes. You have passive attributes. These are usually used to resist some sort of external or internal influence. So you have fortitude, that measures your character's physical resistance, your pain threshold, stress response, and such. You have willpower, which has to do with mental resilience, composure, peace of mind, and you have reflexes, which has to do with the character's quickness, responsiveness, and physical instinct. Active attributes come into play when the player characters want to affect the world or the characters in the world or objects in some way. So you have reason, which is the character's analytical ability. You have intuition, the character's empathy and gut feeling. You have perception. This is the character's alertness. You have coolness, which is the character's grace under pressure. Violence, which measures the character's raw strength and fighting expertise and viciousness. And you have charisma, which measures the character's charm and rhetorical talent, which is used to persuade or manipulate others. You also have soul, which has to do how your character interacts with supernatural forces. So just to clarify about moves, each move is triggered by something the player character wants to do, or something that the game master does that affects the player characters or the world around them. So the players make a roll, usually involving some sort of modifier related to their attributes, their advantages, or something related to that particular situation. It could be a positive or negative modifier. It could also have something to do with the disadvantages. And then there is an outcome that results in either complete success when you roll a 15 or above, a success with complications when you roll 10 to 14, and if you roll 9 or below, that's a failure. So there is no roll for initiative in this game. It's all very reactive and proactive depending on who decides to affect a particular object, non-player character, the world, or other player characters. In fact, this is a game, because of the dark nature of KULT Divinity Lost, this is a game where player versus player combat could actually be encouraged in some situations. It could be lethal or non-lethal, you never know. Just keep in mind that it has to make sense with the fiction of the game. It's not just to see who wins the battle. It has to do with the conflicts, the traumas, anything that the player characters will experience. But for the most part, it's encouraged that the player characters work together, because they already have the entire world and beyond against them. Before we proceed further, let me talk a bit more about how a standard combat encounter would proceed. Let's take our couple of characters from the example that I gave some moments ago as reference. Maybe they escaped from that chase in the alleyways and they decided to regroup or take momentary refuge in the apartment of one of the characters. So they go into this apartment and they open the door, and suddenly this strange creature composed of flesh and metal with exposed bloody organs starts to charge at them. One of the characters is at the front and he has his suitcase at hand. So this beast is trying to slash his head off. So the player, decides that his player character is going to try to block that attack using his suitcase. So he would be making a roll of avoid harm as an action. This applies to any situation in which you decide to block or dodge or parry. You roll plus your reflexes. Now remember, this system is more focused on the storytelling side of things. You won't be getting too much into specifics when it comes to different actions. You have broad categories. So you make your roll, and if you roll 15 or above, you will emerge completely unharmed. He will block that attack using his suitcase. However, maybe he rolled between 10 and 14. So that character will avoid the worst of it, but the game master will decide if that character ends up in some sort of bad spot or out of balance, or maybe he actually sustained partial harm, but maybe he was too slow, he rolled 9 or less. So now he takes all of the harm from that attack. When an attack gets through, it deals damage, and it also depends on the weapon that enemy is using. In this case, he's attacking with claws. so he will deal considerable damage or harm. So now the character will have to endure injury. This is another move. This is a roll of your couple of 10-sided dice, plus your fortitude minus the harm inflicted. And if you are wearing armor, this also adds to the roll. If you are lucky, you will roll 15 or above, so you ride out the pain and you keep going. But if you roll between 10 and 14, you are still standing, but you are affected by one condition, depending on what the game master deems appropriate. Maybe the injury throws you off balance, or maybe you lose something, or you receive a serious wound. And if you did pretty poorly on your roll, maybe you roll 9 or less, the injury is overwhelming. So depending on the situation, maybe the character gets knocked out and also receives a serious wound, or maybe the character receives a critical wound but may continue to act. But if you already have a critical wound, you cannot choose this option again and you will die. So as you take wounds, you will be less effective in combat. You will take penalties because of your wounds as they get worse. You could end up with a serious wound that requires appropriate care and time to heal, but will not get worse on its own. You can actually remove the penalty for serious wounds by taking certain substances, alcohol or painkillers. If you get a critical wound, it will not heal on its own and it will get worse if left untreated. And then your character will die. So as you can see, this is a very gritty game. Even combats that do not follow a step-by-step type of procedure exactly, but are still more involved, even those combats can end up pretty quickly with the death of an entire group or several participants in combat. So you need to take this game, even though it's a storytelling game, you need to focus on it as if it were real life. And as I said before, it depends on the situation. Some combat encounters could be resolved with just a single roll without taking into consideration harm or anything. It depends on the type of attack that you are using and how unprotected or vulnerable your enemy is. There are other similar moves, like for example the keep it together move. This is when you exercise self-control to keep from succumbing to stress, traumatic experiences, psychic influence and such. And there's also, for example, act under pressure. This is when you do something risky under time pressure or to try to avoid danger. Maybe in the other encounter, the game master decides that act under pressure is more appropriate rather than avoid harm, because the enemy surprised the player characters as they were entering the apartment. So maybe lifting that suitcase to use it as a sort of shield it's more of an act under pressure type of move. This has to do with coolness. And if you want to attack your enemy, you have the engage in combat move. This is a roll plus your violence. So if you roll a 15 or more, you inflict damage to your opponent and avoid counterattacks. But if you rolled between 10 and 14, you inflict damage, but at a cost. Maybe you are subjected to a counterattack. Maybe you do less damage than intended. Maybe you are beset by a new threat. Or if you roll 9 or less, the attack doesn't go as you wanted, and you actually get some sort of severe penalty or damage, or you're subjected to some sort of bad luck, or you pay a high price for your failure. It all depends on the encounter, on the positioning of the characters involved in that conflict. It depends on many things, but it is paramount that it makes sense with the fiction. So as you can see, this is a very simple system. You almost feel like there are no subsystems within KULT Divinity Lost. It's all quite unified. Making a roll for an investigation related check or social interaction related check will not feel different at all when making a roll to score a hit with your attacks. The main difference would be the harm system. But if the game master wanted to, he could run several encounters, both in the social areas or investigation, research and combat, and they could all feel practically the same, so that things flow smoothly, that everything is resolved with a single check in each situation. Although I would recommend that you add a few encounters that actually have the harm system, because I think that would make battles a bit more strategic and tactical and exciting. There are also some other things involved, for example, relations. The strength of your relationships with others could be an advantage or disadvantage. These relationships will change during the course of a campaign. So maybe you started with someone who was your friend, and by the end of a scenario or a set of scenarios, he's actually leaning more towards enemy, and vice versa. Maybe someone with whom your character was not on friendly terms at first becomes one of your strongest allies or even friends by the end of a scenario or a continuation of scenarios. And this could also work as relation moves. Scenes in which your relations are in danger, or you are in danger in the presence of your relations, they are going to work as a move, and the strength of your bond could work in your advantage or could actually be a liability or weakness. It all depends. You also have dramatic hooks. This is basically a player request for their particular player character to take a certain action during the story. During each game session, each player should have 2 dramatic hooks for their character. So this is something that they want to finish or reveal or tell or develop or investigate, and if they manage to accomplish this, they will gain experience points for their character development, so that they level up. After they have accumulated a specific number of experience points, they will be able to advance, and you also have all the details on how much each advancement costs in terms of experience points. And of course, anything new that you learn or obtain, it has to make sense with the fiction. After that, you have a section detailing equipment. These are broad categories. That is, you have edged weapons. You're not going to have a separate category for each type of edged weapon, because this leans more towards storytelling. You have the edged weapons category for knives, daggers. You also have crushing weapons such as baseball bats, crowbar. You have the chopping weapons category for axes, swords, and with details about their attacks, the type of damage that they deal, and some effects that could result when you make a really good roll or roll pretty poorly. So for example, maybe you had an incredible success and you were attacking with a crushing weapon. Now the character is knocked down as well. But maybe you were the one who failed. Let's say you were attacking with your bat against an opponent with an edged weapon, and you rolled pretty poorly, and the weapon that your enemy was using, natural, unnatural, or some type of tool, allows that enemy to take advantage of your blunder and not only attack you but another player character as well. You also have the handgun category, the magnum handgun, the submachine gun category. Remember, these are broad categories. For example, in submachine guns, you have the H&K MP5, the H&K MP7, and similar things. You also have the assault rifle category, machine guns, rifles, combat shotguns, explosives, armor, different types of armor that is light and heavy. You also have special equipment such as lockpicks, tear gas spray. You also have a dog. You want to have a dog, an attack dog, you can have that. You also have first aid kits, stun guns, flashbangs, all sorts of things. After all of that, we get the Game Master chapter. This gives you all the information that you need to know on how to run a game of KULT Divinity Lost. A scenario of KULT, or rather a game session of KULT, is basically a conversation. There are 3 things that a game master in KULT needs to accomplish during a session. Each session needs to tear back the illusion to reveal the true reality behind the world or life or the cosmos. The game master also needs to keep the player characters on edge, only allowing moments of respite. He also needs to let the player character's actions make an impact regardless of the consequences. This can be accomplished by following certain principles. By insinuating the supernatural, addressing the characters, not the players, so that it's more of an immersive experience. Making moves, but using the fiction to disguise why. Making moves and describing them in fiction. Assigning motivations to all of the non-player characters. Giving the creatures their own internal logic. Asking questions and building on the answers. And also being a fan of the player characters, because this is a very dangerous and lethal world. It's a very bleak setting, potentially tragic. So it is advised to follow up or go along with the smart choices that the player characters make they are going to need that extra help. You should also think beyond the scene from time to time. Think about the long-term effects and how the non-player characters and the world needs to feel like a living, breathing place. Everything is moving, regardless of what the player characters are attempting to do, and sometimes directly related to what the characters are doing. This chapter also details the finer points of scenes, and there are many tips and advice on, for example, how to handle separate moments. As I was telling you before, maybe the group is separated and each character is dealing with his or her own thing. With different non-player characters, you can have an entire session, if you wanted to, with the characters doing stuff on their own. Because the system is quite fast, conflicts resolve quite quickly. You will not have a single player character hogging the spotlight all the time. You also have more information on Game Master's moves, when to use them, how to apply a soft or hard Game Master move. A soft Game Master move could be something challenging but not as punishing. Maybe it just momentarily hinders the player characters, maybe they lose an important but not vital piece of equipment or any important item or resource that they need for an adventure, and now they have to do something to get it back or replace it. Or maybe you want to insert a hard Game Master move. This is usually related to something quite punishing, perhaps maiming the player character for a mistake, making them lose a vital clue that will result in the death of a non-player character, or maybe it's something combat related or exploration related that could result in the death of a player character. So you have many different examples on soft Game Master moves and potentially hard Game Master moves, such as separate them, capture someone, put someone in a bad spot, exchange harm for harm. Perhaps in combat everybody's just slugging it out and they are taking damage for damage. It could be pretty much anything. So you have more things to consider, like describing minor details to make the world feel real, zooming out and zooming in to the action, sharing the spotlight, as I was saying, taking breaks to contemplate until you are ready to go again. Sometimes things could get quite heavy and you need some time to relax before moving on. You also have more information on conflict resolution, even between player characters, how conflicts could impact individual player characters or non-player characters, how conflicts could escalate. You also have information on the flow of different situations and encounters, moving and harming conflicts and gangs, because you have a system if you want your character to fight several opponents at the same time, and some archetypes actually have gangs at their disposal or henchmen. So you could also have conflicts with larger groups. This is a streamlined way of treating those gangs as single entities so that combat flows a bit more smooth. You also have information on the horror contract, that is, know how much is too much for a particular group of players. You need to know your players to focus on quality before quantity. You're building the atmosphere, just placing the right scares and disturbing details at the right time rather than just bombarding the session with a lot of gruesome things without taking a sense of artistry when depicting the gruesomeness of the scenario. More information on staying in scene and being suggestive when it is needed. You also have details on how to handle the inexplicable concerning people, situations, places, how to create a feeling of vulnerability or exposure, daring to be unpleasant, creating interesting monsters while it all makes sense with the fiction. And you also have tips on when the lie is revealed. This is going to be very useful when you are playing, for example, with a group of sleepers and suddenly their world, their normal world, comes crashing down and realize that they have been living behind this curtain of lies, and then they realize that there is a horrible reality behind it all. Following that, there is an entire chapter detailing how to set up a story, how to choose a setting, because this is a game of contemporary horror. It's supposed to happen around our time, around 2018, 2019, but you could play it a few years before or after, although it would be easier to set it in a few years before. There's also information on how to choose the archetypes for that particular time and place where the scenario is happening. You also have information on dark secrets, because the dark secrets of the player characters are going to color and shape the entire scenario. or the chain of events that will happen. You have information on, for example, shared dark secrets, predetermined themes. You also have information on the intrigue map, which is basically a way to chart or draw the events as they are happening. The different hubs such as player characters, events, places, monsters, organizations, and how to create links or connections between them through, for example, dark secrets, external threats. You also have information how to make sense of advantages and disadvantages within the fiction, how the player characters are not just a set of statistics, rather they are representations of living beings trying to make sense of this bleak world around them. You also have information on how to make sense of the different relationships between the player characters and non-player characters. And following that, we have a chapter detailing the first session. They really want you to have a perfect experience with KULT Divinity Lost. They cover the very basics. Even if you have never played a role-playing game or an RPG that leans more towards the storyteller side of things, here you have all the information, how to set up time and place, have pencils and erasers ready, dice, how to take breaks and consider the characters, the setting, how to make sense of the supernatural and get accustomed to the cult's cosmology. You also have information how to choose music, how to use the intrigue map correctly, how to properly or adequately present the world to the players, how to introduce the player characters into the world, how to activate disadvantages and advantages. And then we have a chapter detailing influences, using the higher powers in KULT Divinity Lost. This has to do a lot with the story, with the background of KULT. Let's go a bit more into detail about the setting. Humanity was at that state of divinity. They were basically shaping reality as they wanted, living in a metropolis. Metropolis could be considered as humanity's reign and paradise. This does not mean that humanity was perfect in that divine state. There were several questionable features about it. For example, they had slaves to do their bidding, and they don't necessarily match what we would know as moral or ethical concepts. However, they were taken down by the Demiurge. The Demiurge set about his own version of Metropolis. He had his archons, which were like the second in command to him, and I say were in past tense because something will happen. And so the archons governed different principles, such as hierarchy, submission, community, safety. But then some things happened that shook up the power structure established by the Demiurge. The Demiurge mysteriously disappeared, and his entire organization of Metropolis fell into disarray. And one of his archons betrayed him. She started a rebellion, even killing members of the recently usurped Metropolis. It's important to note that at this moment, humanity had already been enslaved in this materialistic world, in this superficial cosmovision. And the forces of Inferno, which are basically mirror images or the shadow of the powers or principles of Metropolis, took advantage of this disarray. Astaroth, who is the brother of the Demiurge, took action. The forces of Inferno, which are the Death Angels, do not care about humanity. They will use humanity as pawns in order to topple down the Archons. So the forces of Inferno also represent principles, darker principles. So you have principles such as power, abuse, exclusion, fear, torment, compulsion. Each one served as a counterbalance to the forces of Metropolis. And there were also other factions that took advantage of this chaos in Metropolis, such as the Underworld. The forces of the Underworld also composed by other groups, such as the Children of the Underworld or the She Who Waits Below, that fascinates humanity, trying to plunge them into an obsessive search for secrets and darkness in a labyrinth. You also have other forces, such as, for example, Limbo, the Dream Princess, and Gaia, the Living Earth. And we will talk a bit more about those later on. So here you have more information on how to create threats based on these different conflicts between the factions and the principles. So it has information how to create threats based on the intrigue map that I was telling you about, based on the higher powers. You could perhaps choose one or more of these higher powers so that all of the minions, the encounters, the dangers, the threats within an adventure, which could be considered universally as just threats, it will have some sort of relation or significance or symbolism related to one or more of the higher powers. Because each one of these threats, be it enemies, some sort of situation or energy or trap, are going to be related to specific moves to better represent those principles, be it principles of Metropolis or of the Abyss. Maybe something can reveal a prophecy or exposition. Maybe there's a move that hides something that blocks a path, that opens a portal, that rends the illusion, that shows another dimension or summons demons. Opponents also have the abilities and powers. A lot of them are very strong. A normal human could withstand perhaps 3, 4, or even 5 wounds of damage, but here there are beings that could take 8, 10, 15, or even 20 or more wounds. So we are talking about normal humans using conventional weapons, and perhaps if they are lucky, some more supernatural artifacts, trying to fight, to stand toe to toe with beings beyond their comprehension. Even if the player characters manage to become enlightened, it's still no guarantee that they will survive even a single encounter against one of these alien powers. Throughout most of the book, you have different enemies scattered throughout the background information, and that's perfect if you are reading about a particular principle or place. You have enemies concerning that principle, and then you can use them in the scenario that you are building. But here in this particular section you have all the list of abilities, different things that the non-player characters could use against or maybe in favor of the player characters. It depends on the alliances and conflicts between both forces. So for example, you have abilities such as Beast Lord. Nearby animals become enthralled by the being and obey them slavishly. You have Blood Drinker. Heals wounds and regains power by drinking blood. You have Cold-Hearted. This NPC cannot be influenced or charmed. You have Monstrous Form. Humans who see this creature's true form must keep it together to not panic. Remember, keep it together is going to be a move, a check that you need to do. There's also Regenerates. This NPC regains wounds, or maybe it's ethereal. Any form of physical, non-magical harm has no effect on the being. And you have a lot of powers, so there is a lot of value here. You will be able to create enemies and enemies with different abilities and powers, and the player characters will never know what they are going to face unless they do perhaps proper research, more conventional research or otherworldly research, or maybe if they have some sort of clue as to the principle they are fighting against or the principles. You have information on unique moves that the enemies could use against the player characters, and they are categorized as weak, novice moves, considerable, to powerful and exceptional, all related to, for example, combat, influence, magic. So any sort of situation, maybe it's a social situation, something related to investigation, you will have the moves for that to challenge the player characters. All sorts of attacks, flying attacks, using different weapons. Even if the creature is a sort of supernatural entity, it doesn't mean that it won't use, for example, guns against the player characters. Then we have a chapter detailing downtime, the period between game sessions. Here there is a lot more when it comes to details using the intrigue map and anything related to new influences and threats. What happens with the advantages and disadvantages and dark secrets of the player characters as they move from one scenario to the other. How those things change, making sense with the fiction. Have there been any other new revelations about the truth and the lies that cage the player characters? Here you have more information on how to challenge the player characters related to character and story development. what happens when a player character dies, how to replace that character, how to end a series of scenarios or a single scenario, when to end it and how to end it. Following that, we have information on how to construct or build a scenario, creating a checklist for scenario building to establish the concept, the setting, the backstory, the archetypes that you're going to use, different milestones, how to reward the player characters as they reach certain objectives, as they fulfill different goals. One of my favorite chapters of this book is Beyond the Veil. This is all about the background story of KULT, Divinity Lost. And let me tell you, there are some really serious and dark concepts here. They base this entire mythology in real-world mythology. So the lore is based or supported in the darker aspects of real-world philosophy. You have some really cryptic and mysterious things related to the Kabbalah. You also have things based on Gnostic thought. That is, here you have a real angelic and demonic names. If you have some reservations concerning those themes and names, I recommend that you check out a video that I did some time ago, about a year ago I think, concerning such themes. It could be informational, because I think you would be missing out avoiding KULT Divinity Lost just because it has some taboo type of concepts. I think there is a lot of philosophical and educational value in KULT Divinity Lost, and I will talk a bit more about that at the end of this review. So here in this chapter, it's all about how the archons and the angels captured or enslaved humanity by the power of their principles, creating this illusion of shallowness or numbing or superficial reality around humanity. Humanity is kept in a certain, like a torpor or trance or a drugged state in which they are not aware of their own divinity, on the powers that they once wielded. So here you have a hierarchy of all of the principles, of the rulers of the different powers, the type of followers and minions of these spheres of influence, their symbols, their enemies, information on allies, on servants, their current state after the disappearance of the demiurge. You could base an entire campaign featuring a single one of these principles, and there would be a lot of material to choose from concerning the agendas and entities that the player characters will clash against, or perhaps have some dealings with. Following that, we have a chapter with more details concerning the illusion, the veil that blinds us, because the setting of KULT Divinity Lost always has to do with decadence in the city. We have towers of glass and metal that lead nowhere and yet hide many portals, gateways, and mysteries. There are more details concerning our captivity, how this world has been built upon 1,000 lies, how we are our own jailers because we fail to take into consideration this scheme of totality, of the worldly powers that act against us, and how we create our own chains because of our ignorance, and how all of the different powers, they all fear our awakening because once humanity ruled supreme. There are more details concerning our lost divinity, how we are living fake lives and we are in a state of slumber, but we still have that chance to awaken. There's also information on how the illusion will crumble if the characters try to interact with realities in exposed places where the illusion is at its thinnest, such as, for example, slums, asylums, places that reminds us of death, such as prisons, death camps, the wilderness, catastrophe areas, different places of the underworld, even the dark net, crime scenes. There could be artifacts hidden in our own world, or in the other side of the world, beyond the illusion, or perhaps just in the place between. Humanity's realm, this cage, this illusion, is known as Elysium. And here you have information on how to expel creatures back from Elysium, or draw someone back into Elysium. You also have information on how to conceal something's true semblance and revoke magical effects. Player characters could start out as normal humans, but as they delve and go deeper into their own dark secrets and other mysteries and realities of the world, they will make sense of many things to the point that they could potentially alter reality. You have information on the creatures living within these obscure places, such as the borderliners, who exist in Metropolis Shadow and live between the two worlds. We also have a chapter focused completely on Elysium, giving further information as to what we consider the real world, but it is not so. So we have a lot of adventure seats or scenario seats here. For example, in rundown bars of Barcelona's suburbs, dream magicians meet over chess games, where every move reveals the secrets of limbo. In central Manhattan, the weeping child is initiated into the mysteries of the cannibal cult, as the first piece of raw meat is placed on his tongue by the singing hierophant. And there are many adventure seats or scenario seats, 2 pages with about 30 seats each page. You also have information on gods or deities, such as the god of the highways, the nightingale of the city, the swap dealer. Each of these powers could be used as an enemy or as an ally, mostly an enemy, surely, unless there is something to be gained by that entity when having dealings with the player characters. When it comes to Elysium in general, anything that keeps some sort of control or humanity in a lulled state of trance can be considered an enemy of humanity in its path to divinity. So anything related to religion, to political agendas, even trends, suspicious forms of entertainment, it's all placed here by different jailers so that humanity does not realize its true divine potential. And that's also quite exciting and challenging, because these jailers, as the player characters try to investigate the truth behind it all, are going to do whatever they can to keep humanity asleep and try to plant disinformation as to the reality of the death angels, the archons, saying that perhaps they do not exist, that they are some sort of metaphor or symbolism. It could be used in many ways so that humanity is never awakened to other realities. The next chapter, known as Beyond Madness, is everything about society's castaways, how some characters could become insane, or maybe the player characters will have to interact with some people that have fallen to madness. There's information on psychiatric care, the soul's attempted escape, all sorts of psychosis and phobias and paranoia, all sorts of disorders, and how within insanity and madness, sometimes the illusion tears a lot easier or a lot more efficiently. However, this could attract beings. If the characters try to learn things that would break the mind of a normal human, it could attract beings from beyond, or it could create a distortion of time and space. It could actually cause some changes in their own bodies. You have information on cults, their ties to different powers, members, agenda, the moves that the game master can use. So you have cults such as the Realms of Madmen, the Sirens. There are also creatures like the Alucinades, which are born out of hallucinations, terror, and powerlessness, and cast in the mold their creator fears the most. There are also the Amentoras. The Amentoras is basically a being of shadow, which haunts Elysium and sometimes Limbo. You have many different types of creatures to challenge the player characters. Quite bizarre, quite monstrous and terrifying. In the next chapter you have Beyond Passion. This one contains a lot of information on how the jailers manipulate humanity through their emotions, their passions, using perhaps drugs and religion and entertainment to manipulate them and keep them blind to what really is going on. And it is only when humanity experiences some sort of transcendental experience that they can understand the truth or pierce the veil. And this does not mean that it's going to always be a positive experience. They could have a transcendental moment by engaging in some dangerous practices, and perhaps accidentally they actually start to look at the different realms of existence. There are also a couple of cults related to this, such as the Urban Elite. And you have creatures such as the Mancipia. The Mancipia were originally humanity's creations, which satisfied our passions and inspired our creativity. When the Demiurge pulled the veil of illusion over our eyes, many of these beings were annihilated and the others were forced into servitude by the Archons. You also have other things such as the Darthea, which is an entity of dreams and madness, which has been created out of humanity's desire for sex. You also have the Liliths, which are creatures who are born out of our own passions and appetites and which have their origins in limbo. The next chapter, Beyond the Dream, is all about the dream world, traveling between dreams, our inner universe. This is a very interesting place. There could be some beings, both human and otherwise, that decided to stay in limbo, in a sort of pocket dimension of their own creation. Here you have information on how to alter dreams, open portals. Some decide to stay in this realm of dreams and ambiguity, but that also means that they cannot move forward. They stay in this pocket dimension. But perhaps the player characters will have to travel into these pocket dimensions to obtain some sort of hidden knowledge or information on how to move to other areas. The most powerful inhabitants of this zone, and perhaps the most tragic, are the Dream Princes. They are people who have abandoned their bodies in Elysium via their art of dreaming and have created personal realities close to vortexes. So they are rulers of these dream realities. They are not just inhabitants. They control their own reality within this dimension. And while they have escaped the machinations of, for example, the Archons and the Death Angels, they are still trapped within their own knowledge and perception of things. There are cults related to all of this, such as the Stillwater Collective or the Black Sails. You also have creatures such as the Ichthyeria, which are born of vortex and only exist in limbo. Outwardly, they resemble myriapods with segmented bodies, spindly legs, and fragile antennae. You also have dream beings such as the Moth Child, which has a cumbersome body, ash grey and naked. Moths with powdery wings crawl over its flesh. There's also the Seamstress. As the seamstress approaches, pain starts spreading across your body. You sense a humming melody, the scent of camphor, and how the light appears faint and sooty. When she is finally beside you, your body splits into pieces, your internal organs spill out in a slurry over the ground. There are also some dream wanderers that have entered this strange dimension since several years ago and have been here since then, moving between the different dreams. Perhaps they could be allies or enemies of the player characters. The next chapter is the Underworld. This is all about the darkness and the nothingness. There is a huge underworld labyrinth here. You will need guides to navigate the different regions. You have a detailed description of the different levels with their hunting grounds, the different cultists that you can find here, the borderland, and a labyrinth within the labyrinth. You have places such as the Coral Portal. There's also information about that which dwells in the depths and the Watchers of the Archons. Even here they have a presence. You also have information on the city of Tonor, the last city. You also have more information on human population here, biomechanical keepers dwelling in the darkness. You also have information on the fallen realms of strange machines in the deepest parts, on the Temple of the Blind, and of course information on She Who Waits Below, a powerful mother who summons nothingness in the hearts of others. There are also cults related to this, such as the Red Brotherhood and the Atlantean Dreams. You have creatures such as the Zealots. They are people who were skinned alive and sacrificed to the Grand Sanctir. Screaming, they are drawn into the disgusting abomination's body, coalescing with its fleshy mass and distorted through extreme suffering. There are also the Kairath. They are creatures living in the sewers and catacombs just beneath the city's surface. They are grotesque, bloated, and rotting abominations, stinking carcasses melded with metal, junk, and trash. There are also biomechanical keepers, created by forgotten masters. They are employed to protect, unite, and ensure the survival of the children of the underworld. There are also phantoms, beings who have been slowly devoured by nothingness, with only a shard of them enduring. You also have information about the children of the underworld, which is an umbrella term for the innumerable peoples who have been driven into exile in the underworld, such as the Asadaevae. These are long and slender with delicate features, pale skin, and long, thin hair. They are ethereal and move with solemn grace. Perpetually naked, and a veil of dust spreads like a nebula around their bodies, which they use to weave illusions. You also have, for example, the Verin. Fat and swollen, the Verin stick to their living chambers, where the water is kept hot and steaming in artificial ponds. When they venture out, they are draped in wet Zirza algae, or ride in spider-like machines with steam chambers. And of course, you needed a chapter featuring Metropolis, humanity's primordial home. It is said that humans built cities, driven by a sense of nostalgia of what was lost, taken from them by the Demiurge and secured by the Archons. So you have all the details and information concerning the Eternal City, what it's like to wander through it, the phenomena that happens there. It's a machine city, where the illusions and order of the entire universe are created. Metropolis is a divine maze of alleyways, passageways, stairwells. There are mausoleums, monuments, citadels, and temples. There are towering black monoliths coated with an oily surface. The air is filled with buzzing flies. So as you can see, even though this is humanity's divine ancestral home, it's also filled with terrifying things. It's a place of contrasts, where the things of great beauty and elegance coexist with nightmares and dreadful edifications. You could also find shadows that begin to twist and turn, followed by an icy chill that makes you tired and weak. But there are also machines with strange cogwheels that stand motionless and rusting. A vine with tiny white flowers grows among them, defiantly emerging from the cracked asphalt. In this chapter you also have a lot of seeds and details and features that will help you design an infinity of scenarios and campaigns. In this place of danger and wonder, the characters could come into the presence of an Archon, or they could stumble into memories from the past. They could find gateways that connect Metropolis to Elysium. There's also information on cults, such as the Prophets of the Third Temple, Section 11, and the Flag Chatters. There are also details on Metropolis survivors. Many of these inhabitants were once the slaves of humanity, and some adapted to the change that Metropolis went through as the Demiurge took it from humans, and now the new masters, the Archons and the Angels, took reins or control of humanity's former slaves. Some take pleasure in seeing humanity enslaved or caged, but some others are just opportunists, trying to make the best of the current situation. So you have information on the Asguls, who were former slaves of humanity. They harbor fear, desire, and hatred towards human beings. Something to understand about this enslavement of humanity is that when humans die, the rulers of Metropolis take their souls and they feed on them. And when they are satisfied, when their hunger has been satiated, they return the souls of humanity to the cage, to Elysium, to repeat the process. In a way, they are farming humans, tossing them into the world, having them live all sorts of experiences while being blissfully ignorant of the true reality, and then taking them once more to use them as a sort of food that is constantly being recycled. There are also other creatures such as the Gynekids. They are solitary carnivores which hunt in Metropolis and other worlds beyond the illusion. They are vaguely anthropomorphic creatures and can move on 2 or 4 legs. Their skin is dark grey and sticky, and their genitalia is a meandering tentacle-like organ. You also have other things such as the Techrons, which are creatures of meat, bone, and plastic, cybernetic life forms originating from the Machine City, where they tend the ancient machinery. All sorts of creatures with different attacks, different moves, different ways of interacting with the visitors of Metropolis. There are even beings of great prestige, such as the Tomb Guardian. In the City of the Dead, the Tomb Guardian stands silent vigil over the empty chapel. He is quiet, serene, and wrapped in tattered veils. He holds a sword etched with magical runes. He allows no one over the threshold to the empty chapel. You even have information on Yeoman, the lost god, who ruled over a world of sparkling purple seas and multiple suns burning in the sky. It used to rule over its subjects from atop the magnificent machines towering over the purple waters, yet its world crumbled, dismantled bit by the old rulers of Metropolis. You also have information on savage beasts, such as the Krustats, fly-like creatures with human faces and bodies half a meter long and semi-transparent. You also have information on the Erinyes. These airborne scavengers exist across Metropolis. Biomechanical in nature, they resemble disassembled pterosaurs. There's also information on the people of the Metropolis, such as the Entranced, who live in small tribes in Metropolis. These are survivors, scrap collectors, and hunter-gatherers who live in post-apocalyptic conditions. You also have the Feral. These were once people, but have developed into feral abominations and now live in Metropolis ruins and shadows. They have been distorted by contagion, poison, and other worse things. You also have the Angels, who were created by the Demiurge. They were part of the 10 angelic choirs, which were subordinated to each of the archons. Unfortunately, they had little time to recover during the Great Rebellion, when the forces of Metropolis took sides with the disappearance of the Demiurge. Each wanted power of the Metropolis, and many angels died. Little remains of the angels' past hierarchies, stately ceremonies, or former duties. You have information of each of these choirs, of the hierarchies, their functions, what they represent, the ways that they enslave humanity, who they serve, and how they uphold the law. I really like the artwork. It's so grotesque, but at the same time somewhat fascinating or enchanting. It's a strange contradiction. The next chapter features Inferno, a place of terror, suffering, and yet some would consider it a place of unspeakable beauty. In Inferno, there are the Black Citadels, twisted reflections of their heavenly counterparts. You also have the Sufferings Oubliettes, where the tortured experience horrific punishments and sublime pleasures. You also have information on the brother of the Demiurge, Astaroth, who has been searching for the Demiurge and currently holds power over Inferno. He is the ruler. He is a primordial force, a lighthouse of darkness. You also have information on the Purgatories, Inferno's clergy, each one dedicated to one of the Death Angels. Each of these clerical bodies have different ways of religiously manipulating mankind against the Archons. So it's not that the forces of Inferno feel some sort of sympathy or friendliness towards mankind. Rather, they see them as tools to destabilize their enemies, the forces of Metropolis. You have information on the influence of Inferno, how death is only the beginning, how once you get to Inferno, you are branded, the influence of the Death Angels and their entrancement of humanity's soul. You also have information on the cults, like the Sacred Brotherhood, or the White Eagle Conglomerate. You also have information on creatures such as the Nepharites, which are the true interpreters of the Death Angel's will and constitute the background of the 10 clergies. You also have information on the Purgatites. They are what remains of the tattered, mutilated, and mangled human bodies after Inferno's endless tortures. There are also the Razites. Sometimes screaming victims are removed from their purgatories and fettered inside infernal machinery. Their human bodies are reshaped with scalpels, hooks, razor blades, drills, and syringes. Bizarre mechanisms, tubes, and pipes coalesce with their flesh, intertwined with their nerves, and are bolted into their skeleton. There are also details concerning the damned legionnaires, the pilgrims of suffering, Astaroth's incarnates. There are even beings that take shape or form of objects in Elysium, in the material realm of humans. For example, there is the revolver. This incarnate takes the form of a heavy caliber revolver of unknown model and manufacture. People become obsessed with this revolver, and invariably, things always end in violence. Another demonic entity is John the Baptist's head. This mummified human skull is rumored to belong to the biblical figure. The skull is usually placed in a reliquary and is kept hidden in the attics of isolated monasteries to house power that imparts revelations, always at a terrible price. Then we have a chapter featuring Gaia. This is the cosmic wilderness. It exists next to Elysium. It constantly threatens to devour humanity. That's why cities are built, so that humans are protected from the predators of Gaia. Gaia houses many portals to other worlds. It also contains many creatures such as the Enwildened gods. Once upon a time, the Enwildened may have been enlightened people who traveled Gaia's wilderness or were simply beings and gods from other worlds. The Demiurge's trickery depleted much of their divinity, but was unable to extinguish it entirely. So deep inside Gaia's wilderness, they wait, copulating in hallucinogenic ruts, participating in cruel games of hunting and killing, roving and rampaging across plains and tundra. You have information on the Sentinels, who prevent humanity from escaping safely into the wilderness. Humanity stays in the cage of the cities because they cannot enter Gaia without being devoured by the forces shepherded by the Sentinels. You also have information on the touch of Gaia, what you could find in the borderlands. Perhaps the ground abruptly ends in a deep abyss. In the depths of Gaia, you could feel strong, potent and powerful. Wounds heal, tattoos fade, and your hair grows. You feel like a predator. Your sexual lust is strong, as is your will to dominate and make others obey you. You are now leader of the pack. But you could fall into the wilderness grasp. The beast could awaken within you. Humanity could be peeled away, leaving nothing but a creature of instinct. There could also be virgin births, and you could have out-of-body experiences. There's also information on cults, such as the Sentinel cults. There's a strange deity known as the Iramin Sul that dances across the tender forest moss, the scorching desert sands, and the frozen plains. Following in the god's wake are feathered slaves who can be anything from humans to angels to deranged gods. You also have the Angels of the Ashes. They were once the Demiurge's sentinels in the borderland, the cruelest and most savage of his angels. Later on you have a chapter featuring pacts and magic. Many decide to rely on the help of others for a price. So here you have all the information on how pacts are sealed, what types of pacts happen between otherworldly powers and the humans that decide to strike such bargains or dealings. Maybe it has to do with the human killing someone or kidnapping someone, sabotaging something, sacrificing someone, or seducing someone. The price is always high, and breaking the pact has its consequences. There's also information on magical artifacts in this chapter, such as the Black Armor, which is an archaic set of armor of an unknown material reminiscent of thin black stone, light as aluminium and indestructible by human weapons. Or maybe the Hasselblad SWA-2. This is one of 10 unique camera models of Hasselblad's series from the 50s. It looks just like all the other SWA models, a black small box with a lens on the front. When you snap a photo with the Hasselblad, an image of the true reality will be captured on the film. There are different artifacts, both modern and ancient. You also have information on magic. The schools of magic, such as the School of Madness, Time and Space, Dream, Death, Passion. If the player characters want to master any of these schools, they will have to become enlightened. There are also temples, ritual equipment, information how to play as a magician, if your character reaches that state, and the chapter featuring the Awakening contains all of the details for you to take your aware player character and make the transition into a being that sees through the lies clearly and can even manipulate the principles of creation and order around him, or chaos if needed. So here you have further details on humanity's search for lost divinity, the stages of awakening, from sleeping to aware to enlightened, and once you become awakened, you are basically turning into a demigod. An awakened character is no longer playable, it becomes a non-player character, and therefore it may appear in future adventures as an ally or as an antagonist. So you have details on death magicians, magicians of madness, passion magicians, on heralds of the powers, the children of the night. The process of enlightenment could actually reshape or reform your body into very alien appearances. You have a sample of enlightened archetypes. These are not the only ones. Depending on your character's background and how your character perhaps came into harmony or into terms with his or her own dark secret, they could become enlightened in many different ways, maybe related to one of the schools of magic, maybe in some other way related to an interaction with an archon, with an angel, with a death angel, with a being of Gaia. It could be anything. So as some examples, we have the abomination. Through radical experiments, magical rituals, or the darkness within her, the abomination has been transformed into something not entirely human. A raging monstrosity lives inside her, always ready for an opportunity to tear its way out and cause violence, terror, and death. There's also the Death Magician. The Death Magician wants to understand and control the power of death, utilize ancient knowledge from all sorts of traditions. Then there's the Disciple, that has realized the power of being a cult leader, leading fanatics, controlling them through fear and submission, and reaping the benefits of spreading the message of her dark masters. You also have the Revenant. Sometimes when people die, their souls refuse to leave the land of the living. Instead, they manifest physically or possess another body in order to walk amongst the living. And that's important to keep in mind. These are just some examples. Anything that happens throughout the course of a scenario, or rather linked scenarios, could reshape your character in soul and in body in many extraordinary ways. You have information on power brokers. These are powerful people, creatures, groups, or organizations who serve one of the setting's influences. They can operate as either allies or adversaries in stories involving the enlightened archetypes. Once you reach enlightenment, things will become radically different concerning the stakes, what is at risk, and how the characters will interact with the archons and the death angels and other creatures, with those that enslave or trick or seek to devour mankind. You have a list of enlightened disadvantages. Maybe you were branded, maybe you have persecutors after you, maybe someone created your current state of enlightenment, maybe you have a prodigy, you also have enlightened abilities. Maybe you have a dark aura, maybe you have dark vision, maybe you have a bewitching aura or a commanding voice, perhaps divine strength. You also have information on limitations. Maybe you have bloodthirst. This could be very handy to represent a revenant type of enlightened. Maybe you are bound to higher powers. Maybe you need to resort to cannibalism. Or maybe you have a soul thirst or are controlled by an external force. There's a lot of information here to build an entire scenario featuring the enlightened and perhaps having as its goal becoming awakened and becoming one of the higher powers. Perhaps your player character in a future campaign will become the influence of a particular scenario or linked scenarios. That awakens allies or perhaps his minions could be the obstacles along the path of the player characters, and with a bit of luck or skill, they will get to confront the awakened, the former player character. Or maybe he's actually a patron or an ally, and he supports the characters through the course of the scenarios. However, be mindful, this is called Divinity Lost. There is no easy way through. At the end of the book, you have sheets for all of the different character archetypes, and also you have a quick reference sheet so that you can run the game smoothly. This is going to be very useful for both Game Master and the players. So what do I think of KULT Divinity Lost? This is such a beautiful game. The system is good. It does its job of providing a quick resolution of the different conflicts, of focusing on storytelling, while developing the background and the dark secrets of the player characters, how they deal with their personal history and the future to come, and how the scenarios evolve into a coherent storyline. However, what is truly unique and powerful when it comes to KULT is the entire plotline, the meta plot, you could say, the theme, the flavor, the atmosphere. It stands on its own. The description of the book is being quite modest when saying that it's a game of contemporary horror. This should be categorized in some other way. Perhaps you could say it's Gnostic horror or Kabbalistic horror, it's a very powerful theme and setting. And for those of you that could feel a bit squeamish because there are many mature themes in this book, very powerful psychological horror, there are a lot of details concerning body mutilation, the modification of the human body and soul, all sorts of crimes committed, all sorts of degeneracy, and what you would consider real demonic names. I highly recommend that you watch the video that I'm going to put in the description below to avoid certain situations. If you have a group that feels somewhat squeamish about that, you just need to change a few things. Do not miss out on the opportunity of experiencing KULT Divinity Lost. And as I said in a part of the review, I think there is a lot of educational and philosophical value to this game. This is a work of fiction, but many of the things about seeing through the lies, seeing through the manipulation, becoming aware that there is more to life than just living a shallow experience of getting up, eating, going to work, having sex, going to sleep, rinse and repeat. KULT Divinity Lost encourages you to think about the true value of life. This is a very dark game. There are many gruesome, nightmarish, horrible things within it. But it's because of that it helps you to see the light. It is in the darkest places where a single match shines almost like the sun. You cannot expect to cure the disease unless you study it. So KULT Divinity Lost allows you to explore the darker side of humanity. You cannot deny it, you cannot ignore this darker side of us. But with KULT Divinity Lost, you look at it and you overcome it. Through its drama and through just plain fun, experiencing that chemical change in your body when you get excited or scared, or you feel afraid, or you feel fascinated or nostalgic, when you experience sadness, but then you see a glimmer of hope. Through KULT Divinity Lost, you will enjoy exploring all of those powerful themes, very emotionally charged situations, without being at risk, in the comfort of your own gaming table. Understanding the human condition and going beyond it, or perhaps becoming truly human in a sense of accepting yourself and accepting others and understanding the world around you. Truly a very philosophical game. And of course, some players will only want to try it out to have some fun. That's great too. But I think that the great value of KULT is that the lessons and messages of the game itself practically bleed into each scenario that you create and experience as a game master and as a player. So do not fear the darkness. Embrace it, master it, overcome it. It's like that song from Devil May Cry 4. It was drink it down, enjoy the black around, taste the darkness. And the book really looks so beautiful. I recommend that you get it as a physical book. The PDF looks great as well, but I can just imagine how this is going to look on your shelf. All the black and red and gold colors, it looks so mysterious, somewhat regal, decadent, angelic and demonic. In a few weeks, I'm going to review more KULT related material, so I hope you will watch those reviews too. Thanks for watching my review. If you have any comments or questions, please let me know. See you later.